10 years ago, in April of 2012, I had the opportunity to go audition for the Neal Morse Band. And if you don't know who Neal Morse is, he was a member of Spock's Beard. He's been in Transatlantic, or he's still in Transatlantic, Flying Colors. He's played with Mike Portnoy on a bunch of stuff, and he has a massive solo career, lots of albums that are just under the name Neal Morse. But in 2012, he decided he wanted to have more of a permanent band, the Neal Morse Band, and he wasn't just looking to bring on people to play the parts like he'd had in the past. He was looking for people to come in and be a creative force to make an actual band. And if you haven't checked out any of the Neal Morse Band stuff before, it's really great. In fact, I had the opportunity to interview Eric Gillette, and that's up on my channel. I posted that last week. And he was one of the guitarists that successfully auditioned as opposed to me. But Eric's is a killer player, and the Neal Morse Band is great. And I love all their albums, especially the albums, the big two concept albums they put out in 2016, 2019. If you haven't checked those out, you definitely should. It's really good stuff. But I wanted to kind of talk maybe a little bit about my experience auditioning for Neal Morse and kind of what I learned from it. Now, when I grew up in Alaska, and I didn't have a ton of competition when it came to guitar. I was a big fish in a little pond. And the same thing was kind of true when I went to college. I went to the University of Idaho at the Lionel Hampton School of Music, which is a great school. I learned a ton there, and there's a bunch of amazing teachers and musicians, but there wasn't a huge electric guitar scene. I studied classical guitar, and there's some great classical guitarists there, and my teacher was really great, but there wasn't much in the way of electric guitarists. So once again, I was kind of like the big fish in a little pond, and I'd always had these experiences growing up of being like the best guitar player around, right? And it's not because I was that great, it's just because there wasn't that many other people doing it. So when I went to this audition in Nashville, I was still living in Idaho at the time. I was just finishing up school. I was told by a couple friends that, hey, you should audition for this, and I knew Neal Morse through Transatlantic. Hadn't listened to too much of his solo stuff at that time. So I decided, hey, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I learned the songs, made these videos really quickly, sent it to him, and then I got asked to come to Nashville. And I think at the time I was pretty sure I was going to get it. I was a cocky 24-year-old that hadn't experienced really any sort of competition when it came to playing guitar. So I flew out there, and Neal Morse was super nice, and they treated us really well when we got there. And I auditioned, and then obviously I didn't get it. And at the time I was really upset about that. I was like, man, I was sure I was going to get it, right? I was like, man, this is going to be my next step right out of college. I'm going to join the Neal Morse Band. I'm going to, make it big or whatever. But in retrospect, obviously I didn't get it. And looking back on it now, I was like, I wasn't ready. And truthfully, it was the best thing for me that I didn't get it, because it really pushed me forward. I came back from that and I thought, man, I've got to get better. I've got to get better at the guitar. I've got to get better as a writer. I've got to get better in the production side of things, just content in general. And it really was something that kind of woke me up and said, hey, you're good. You're a good player. You have a lot of potential, but it's time to take it to the next step. And I think if the auditions were to happen today in 2022, that I'd have a much better shot. Now, I still don't think I'd probably necessarily get it, because if you've ever watched Eric play, it's absolutely ridiculous, and he's such a great singer too, and just an all-around great guy. But I think I would at least put up a much better fight for an audition like this. But I'm really glad that I had that opportunity, and actually I'm really glad that I didn't get it, because for myself as a musician, it was something that kind of catapulted me to the next phase of my journey as a musician. And now I've been able to get to a place where I feel like I have my own voice and my own style. And the lessons that I took from that have kind of permeated everything I've done since then. And every once in a while I think about it and I look back on the journey of that audition, and I was like, that was really great. And I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to do that. Now, I thought it'd be really fun to take a look at one of the solos that I had to audition with. So I actually relearned it and re-recorded it a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to post this all on my channel in a few days. But what I have is the original solo that I did in 2012, and then the exact same solo played a couple of weeks ago. So I want to just take a look at a comparison of my playing 10 years later, because I think there's a lot it's good for myself to look back and see where I was before, but also for people who are up and coming now, who think, man, I'll never get to the level of, where I want to be. You can kind of see, at least, in my journey, like if you see some of my videos and think, man, I wish I could play like that, just, we'll see this and be like, oh, wait, he wasn't always able to do this exactly the same way. this would be kind of a fun comparison. I'm excited to kind of dig into this because I haven't really watched myself play this old solo in 5 or 6 years. So here we go. So up on the screen, you see two different versions of what's going to be the same solo. This is from the song It's For You, which is a Neal Morse song. This was kind of the big solo we had to learn as guitarist for the audition. And I understand why he picked it because it's got a lot of sort of shreddy bits in it, but it also has a lot of melodies and held notes and bends. So you kind of get a good grasp of the player as a whole as far as like lead playing goes. So I'm going to play the version I recorded a couple weeks ago so you can see how the solo is supposed to be played more properly. And then we'll compare that against my version from 2012. So there's my version of the It's For You solo from a couple of weeks ago. Now let's look at the 2012 version. I'm just going to go section by section. I'm going to compare and contrast the two different versions. All right, so right off the bat, there's tons of things. First thing to point out is obviously just the production of it in general. This was 10 years ago, so gear wasn't nearly where it is now. I think, things like modelers weren't around. So I was miking up my Mesa Boogie Stiletto with an SM57, if I remember correctly, and that was a great amp. It sounded awesome. But I had like this super old interface. I'm not even sure how it still worked at this point. And then I was running that into whatever MacBook I had at the time. And the camera is actually my MacBook camera. And if you've ever looked at MacBook cameras, even like the new ones, they look absolutely terrible. So obviously just the production in general on the new version is far superior. I mean, you can just look at it. And back then I didn't really know anything about EQ, especially like post EQ, automation, all that kind of stuff. So in the newer version, it's like I've really sculpted my tone more properly. I'm automating parts where I wanted to get louder. I have IRs on it, like a third-party IR. I have post-processing a little bit. Now, these are both done in one take, but just all that little stuff makes it sound a lot better. And then, of course, it looks way better, too, because I have a proper camera now and proper lighting, which I'm sitting underneath right now. And all of those things are elements of my improving as a musician, right? Because it's not just necessarily about the playing, which we'll take a deeper look at, but all the other elements surrounding the playing, too. All of the sort of production, the tone, the video, all of that, which is kind of an integral part of being a musician these days. So it's nice to see the improvement in the playing, but it's also nice to see the improvement just in the look and quality of my videos. The one thing that's better about me there in 2012 is that I'm probably 10 or 15 pounds lighter. So if I could go back and do that and be that weight, that would be the preferable thing here. But everything else, I prefer 2022. So let's take a look at that first section. A couple of things I noticed mainly is that I'm not playing with really a lot of intensity or passion. Like I'm playing the right notes at the right time, but there isn't much energy to it. It's like I'm not vibratoing like hardly any of the notes. And if I do, it's kind of shallow vibrato that doesn't sound very good. I'm just not. It just doesn't sound like I'm really going for it. And I think I was so focused on just playing the right notes at the right time that kind of stuff slipped past me, which in retrospect, that's probably the most important thing with a solo like this. So if we take a look at the new version, you can totally hear the difference. Just like my slide was better. I'm vibratoing that first note, the little bends, big vibrato on that held note. I'm not doing any of that stuff in the version from 2012, which is really disappointing. So let's take a look at the next section. Let's go only that far. Let's go to the current version. All right, so obviously way better in every respect. My bends are actually accurate. They were pretty much all a little flat, it seemed like, on the version from 2012. I'm also not doing any vibrato on the bends in the old version. And then there's that pentatonic run that happens in the middle of there that I'm actually playing incorrectly on the old version. Right here. This one. I'm kind of like doing a generic pentatonic run in the same position with the same notes, but I didn't actually obviously sit down and learn that run properly, which is disappointing. Now, this fast stuff later, I am actually doing the right notes. It's just not as clean as I did it in this later version. All right. So in the newer version, I'm actually playing that pentatonic run correctly, and I do a pickup switch, to my neck pickup for the faster stuff, which is just another small thing, right, that just kind of helps make this sound better. And like even on this newer version, that sweep run isn't maybe as clean as I would like it. I think I only spent like a day or two relearning this when I did it. And that's another thing too, is how quickly you can learn something now. It's like it took me way longer in 2012 to learn this and kind of practice it and get it to where it was, as opposed to now where it's like I didn't really spend the time to sit down and for hours, because I don't really have that amount of time these days to like really hone all of these licks 100% perfectly. Like if I was going to audition now, I would practice this a lot more than I actually did for this video. But it just goes to show you the difference in the ability to learn things more quickly now too. And that's a skill that has developed as I've gotten older and as I've gotten better in my playing. So just every element of that is so much better. The timing is way better too, and just the tone and vibrato and all that. So let's take a look at this next little section here. Now that to me is pretty rough. That first bend I do after those picked runs, those picked runs are played fine, but the bend is like ends up going really sharp and there's no vibrato. And then that last big sweep run, I'm playing incorrectly on the old version. It's kind of getting the point across, but it's not really accurate. And then my timing on that big bend on the top, which is also flat, is not great. And then that last big bend where it goes where it goes like a full step and then down and then two full steps. It's just not played very well, and it's not played with much aggression at all. And in the newer version, I'm really pleased with how this particular part came out. So let's take a look and listen to this. Right, every single element of that is like so much better. I really like how I'm playing those big bends on the top there. They're on pitch, and they're played with some fire behind them. Especially that big last one. I really like how that sounds. This one. And like in both of these versions, I'm playing along with the original guitar solo, which is not the most optimal thing. If I do covers, like I try to find one that doesn't have the original solo or something, but I didn't want to really recreate the whole background because that would have taken too long. So I kind of pushed my guitar forward, so every once in a while you might hear some phasing with the original guitar solo. It would sound better if I didn't have the original solo underneath it, obviously, but that kind of shows you where I'm on and off from the original player. So let's take a look at these arpeggios here. I'll talk about the random shredding in a second. And those are played pretty well. Now, there was some like noise before I came in, like the muting was bad, so that's another element too. But those big sweeps, the big 5-string sweeps, they're actually really supposed to be 6-string sweeps because they're supposed to go down further in pitch. I only go down to the note B on the A string, when really it actually goes all the way down to the note E on the 12th fret of the low string. So I'm playing those incorrectly. And then also besides that, they're a little sloppy too. And then it's kind of weird. So it goes from E minor to D and then to A. So when it goes from E minor to D, I'm actually like going up a D when I should be going up an E minor. Like I'm prepping my hands too early for the next arpeggio. I don't know if you can see that. There, I go up a D arpeggio when I should be going up E minor because it doesn't switch till after that. So sort of every element of that it's not the right notes. The timing's a little off and it's kind of sloppy. Now there's this big run that leads into the end of the solo. It's just a straight scale run and it's actually played pretty cleanly, but it's supposed to be picked, alternate picked, and I'm actually doing legato, right? I'm picking one note per string and doing legato. So obviously in the newer version, I'm going to alternate pick it. So let's take a look at these arpeggios from the version I did a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, even that's not maybe exactly where I'd want it cleanliness-wise, but that's what I had the time to do. But it's just so much better. The accuracy in the actual notes and then the timing of it, that last run being alternate picked, there's less noise happening, and I'm not using a fret wrap in either of these, so it comes down to good muting. So let's take a look at this last sort of shred run. So in the original solo, it just ends on that high note, but there's a long space here, and I think the idea that most guitar players who were auditioning, they're like, hey, this is a chance to kind of just like shred, So let's see what I do in this 10 years ago. All right, some scale runs that are played a little messily, and then some really sloppy. I think the idea was I'm doing like inversions of a C major sweep shape, and then I kind of like do some runs down to a low note. Let's see what I do here on this a couple weeks ago. These were both improvised the end of the solo here, so I kind of just did whatever felt right. I mean, I pretty much do the same thing. I do like a big scale run down, and then I do a bunch of C major inversions, like sweep picked inversions all the way up. And then in this case, I ended up with a big high note on top, which I think works a lot better in this case. But the execution is where this happens much better, right? It's just played so much cleaner, the tone, but just the playing in general. Those sweeps, while maybe not, still 100% perfect, are just like worlds better, right? And it just makes more sense. It's just more impressive because I'm playing it better in general. So that's the entire solo, and I'm it was really fun to kind of relearn this and get it under my fingers. This is a fun comparison to look at, and it makes me feel kind of good about where I'm at as a player. I never recommend that you compare yourself to other players because that's a bad idea. But comparing yourself to an earlier version of yourself is a really good idea, because doing something like this makes me feel really good about where I've come as a musician, and also makes me feel good about where I'm going to keep going as a musician if I, keep pushing hard the way I am. I had a ton of potential back in 2012, and that I've been able to kind of hone that into something that's much more polished and professional, and that sounds a whole heck of a lot better. So hopefully this is interesting to see this comparison, and hopefully it can be inspiring for you if you are feeling, bad about where you are as a musician, because that's something that we all deal with as musicians, just feeling insecure. But it's a good idea to look back. If you have old recordings of yourself, you can look back and check those out. I highly recommend it. So that was my experience with the Neal Morse Band auditions. I'm really glad that I got to do it, and I'm looking forward to whatever the next 10 years brings for me as a musician. And if you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe, hit the bell notification, all that good stuff. Till next time, stay proggy.